Under the town hall of Bremen, Germany, there is a cellar that has been storing wine without interruption since the year 1405. The oldest barrel down there was filled in 1653, and the last outsider reportedly allowed to taste it was Queen Elizabeth II in 1978. That room has held a steady temperature for 600 years, using nothing but stone, earth, and slowly moving air. The refrigerator in your kitchen costs you between $80 and $240 a year to do a worse version of the same job. And the basement under your house probably cannot get through a single summer without a dehumidifier running in the corner. Why does a medieval hole in the ground outperform rooms we build with machines? Because the people who dug it understood things about the underground that we have spent the last 100 years unlearning. This is what they knew, how it worked, and exactly where we threw it away. Norwich, England. The spring of 1507. Two fires swept through the city within weeks of each other and destroyed roughly 40% of its houses. Elm Hill, one of the wealthiest streets in Norwich, lost every building except one. The timber city that generations of merchants had built was gone by summer, but underneath the ash, something survived. Beneath the burned houses sat vaulted cellars of brick and flint, buried deep enough that the fires passed straight over them. When the merchants rebuilt, they did not fill those rooms in. They raised their new houses directly on top of the old cellars, and many of those cellars are still down there today. At least 70 medieval undercrofts survive beneath the streets of Norwich, the largest collection anywhere in England. Almost all of them built in the 15th century by wool merchants who put serious money into rooms nobody would ever see. That raises an obvious question. Why would a medieval merchant spend a fortune on an invisible room? Because in a world without refrigeration, the cellar was the most important room a household owned. It was the difference between a full table in March and an empty one. Medieval Europe ran on a seasonal food economy. The harvest came in between August and October, and whatever a family gathered in those weeks had to last until the following summer. Grain, cheese, butter, salted meat, apples, roots, ale, and wine, all of it collected in a burst of autumn work and expected to survive for the better part of a year. There was no second delivery in February. If your stores rotted in November, you went hungry in spring. And most of what people stored was fragile in one specific way. Ale soured when its temperature swung, wine turned, butter went rancid in warmth and useless in a hard freeze. Root vegetables sprouted in warm air and collapsed into mush after freezing. A merchant with 40 barrels of wine sitting in a bad cellar was not a merchant for long because his entire fortune could spoil in a single hot week. The numbers behind this are brutal. For roughly every 10 degrees Celsius warmer, about 18 degrees Fahrenheit, stored produce spoils close to twice as fast. Drop the temperature by that much, and you roughly double the life of everything on the shelf. Medieval households never saw that written as an equation. They saw it as full barrels or empty ones, and they built accordingly. The wealthy built entire underground service economies. Excavation records and merchant inventories show undercrofts fitted with shelving and divided compartments, some housing a buttery for preparing drink and a pantry for bread and dry goods. At Norwich Cathedral Priory, archaeologists uncovered stone-lined storage pits more than 2 meters deep and a small brick cool house built against the refectory wall, a dedicated cold room for grain and meat feeding one of the richest monastic kitchens in England. This was infrastructure, planned as carefully as the church above it. What they built follows 4 rules, and every one of them is measurable physics. Rule 1 was depth. Dig below the frost line and the ground stops behaving like weather and starts behaving like a battery. At 6 to 12 feet down, soil in a temperate climate holds between 40 and 50 degrees Fahrenheit all year, whether the surface above is baking in July or frozen solid in January. The Earth at that depth is a heat sink of essentially unlimited mass. A cellar sunk into that layer simply borrows cold from the planet. The builders sharpened this wherever the land allowed. In Norwich, most of the surviving undercrofts sit on the hillside above the River Wensum, dug into the slope itself. The excavated cellar created a level platform for the house above, while the doorway at the bottom of the slope let porters roll barrels straight in from the street. The hill did the digging, and the hill did the insulating. They also charged their cellars like batteries. Open the vents on freezing autumn nights, let cold air pour in and chill the stone and the soil behind it, then shut everything down. All that stored winter held the room cold deep into the following summer. Modern cold storage research confirms the method still works exactly as described. Rule 2 was mass. A Norwich undercroft was walled in flint and brick, roofed with a barrel vault or a groined vault, and buried under packed earth and the house above. Building one meant excavating the chamber, raising the walls, bending a temporary wooden frame across the gap, and laying the vault over it course by course until the arch could stand on its own. Once the frame came out, that curve of brick carried everything above it by pure compression, with no beam to rot and no joint to fail. The payoff was thermal as much as structural. Thick masonry absorbs heat slowly and releases it slowly, which flattens the daily temperature swing into almost nothing, and the vault did double duty on top of that. It carried the full weight of the building overhead, and 1507 proved it made the cellar the one room in the city that fire could not reach. The houses of Norwich were timber. The cellars were brick and flint, and that single material decision is why 70 of them are still here. Rule 3 was moisture, and this is the rule we got completely backwards. A medieval cellar floor was left unsealed on purpose. The surface was bare earth, cobbles or gravel, and the ground beneath it constantly released moisture into the room, holding the air at high humidity, usually between 85 and 95%. That sounds like a defect. It was the entire point. In humid air, root vegetables stay plump instead of shriveling into leather. Wooden barrel staves stay swollen and tight instead of shrinking until the cask weeps. Cheese rinds cure instead of cracking open. The walls were built to manage that moisture rather than fight it. The mortar between the stones was lime, and lime breathes. Water vapour passes through the joints and evaporates on the surface instead of pooling inside the wall. Lime even repairs itself. When a hairline crack opens, moisture reactivates the free lime inside the joint. It reacts with carbon dioxide in the air, and the crack seals back into solid calcium carbonate. The United States National Park Service still documents this self-healing behaviour in its official preservation guidance. Medieval masons could not have explained the chemistry. They could point to which walls stayed sound after 200 years, and they kept using the recipe that worked. Where groundwater threatened, they cut drainage channels along the floor to carry it away before it could pool. Walk into one of the Norwich undercrofts and you can still see the human side of all this engineering. Small arched niches are built into the brick, usually opposite the entrance, shaped to hold a lamp or a candle, so the light met you the moment you came down the stairs. These were working rooms, visited daily, in the dark, for centuries. Rule 4 was air, and this is where the design gets genuinely clever. A well-built cellar had at least 2 openings at different heights. A low vent brought cool outside air in near the floor. A high vent, or a shaft rising to the surface, let warm, stale air escape near the ceiling. Warm air rises on its own, and that height difference alone drove a slow, continuous loop of air through the room, with no fans, no machinery, and nothing that could break. In the best examples, the openings were connected through brick or slate-lined shafts placed at calculated heights, so the air crept through the chamber in a complete circuit before leaving. The system ran on physics for as long as the holes stayed open, and it could run for centuries. Fresh air mattered because stored food is not inert. Fruits and vegetables keep respiring after harvest, releasing gases and heat, and a sealed room full of produce quietly ripens and rots itself. Medieval builders had no word for ethylene. They had cellars that stank and spoiled when the air stood still, and cellars that kept, and they copied the ones that kept. Their final insight was the most subtle of all. The enemy of stored food was never warmth by itself. It was fluctuation. A cellar sitting at a constant 52 degrees will hold ale, wine and cheese in good condition for months. A cellar swinging between 48 and 62 will ruin all three. That principle carried straight through into the great pub cellars of later centuries, which held cask ale at a constant 11 to 13 degrees Celsius, using nothing but thick walls and paired vents. And it is exactly what the Bremen Ratskeller has been doing for its wine since 1405. If forgotten food knowledge is the reason you watch this channel, it is also the reason the Medieval Way store exists. The Practical Refined Recipes cookbook rebuilds dishes that fed real medieval households and adapts them for a modern kitchen, and the Sourdough Manual covers bread the way it was baked for centuries before commercial yeast. Both are at medievalway.store, and the link is waiting in the description below. The cellar system worked, and it kept working for something close to 700 years. Then, in 1824, a bricklayer in Leeds named Joseph Aspdin patented a new binder he called Portland cement. The patent looked like a small thing at the time. It was not. Portland cement had every quality a modern builder wants. It sets fast, it gets extremely hard, and it is cheap at industrial scale. It also has one property that nobody treated as a problem until the damage was everywhere. It is nearly vapor-tight. Water that gets into a wall behind cement cannot breathe back out. By the early 20th century, cement had replaced lime almost everywhere, and the old buildings started paying for it. A pre-industrial wall was designed to work like a lung. It absorbed a controlled amount of moisture from the air and the ground, then released it again, breathing through every joint. Coat that wall in cement, and you have wrapped a breathing structure in a plastic bag. Restoration masons across Europe and North America now spend entire careers undoing exactly this mistake. The mechanism of the damage is simple. Repoint a soft historic brick wall with hard cement mortar, and the moisture that used to escape through the lime joints gets trapped inside the brick itself. Winter arrives, the trapped water freezes and expands, and the faces of the bricks blast off in flakes. Masons call it spalling. The National Park Service warns in its preservation briefs that cement repointing can cause damage to historic masonry that is difficult or impossible to reverse. The material meant to protect the wall becomes the thing destroying it, and this is the part that reaches into your own house. If you live in a building older than about 1920 and someone has patched or repointed it with modern grey cement, that wall may be trapping water right now, and correcting a bad cement repointing job typically costs 2 to 3 times what the original repair did. Go look at your foundation this week. Old lime mortar is soft enough to scratch with a key. Cement is not. If your old brick sits in hard grey joints and the faces are flaking away, you are looking at the exact failure the medieval recipe existed to prevent. The same century that sealed our walls also sealed our cellars. Mechanical refrigeration arrived, the cellar lost its job, and renovation by renovation, the old ventilation systems were destroyed. Vents were boarded over, shafts were plastered shut, and rooms designed to breathe became sealed boxes that trap heat the way a thermos does. Surveys of historic pub cellars found exactly this pattern. The ones with their original vents intact still hold a steady temperature on their own. The refitted ones swing with the seasons, and need refrigeration units to do what brickwork once did alone. Then we started building basements out of poured concrete, wrapped in plastic vapor barriers, with sealed floors and no designed airflow at all. Warm summer air leaks in, touches the cool concrete, and condenses. The result is the modern basement, a damp room that grows mold unless a dehumidifier runs all season. We took the room the medieval world used to keep food alive and turned it into a room where we hesitate to store cardboard. The standard fix usually makes it worse. Waterproof paint and cement render gets slapped onto the inside of old stone cellars. The walls stop breathing, moisture builds behind the coating, and within a few years the render blows off in sheets while the damp hunts for a new way out through the floor. And in place of all of it, we plugged in a box. A typical refrigerator costs between $80 and $240 a year in electricity, and an old unit humming away in a garage can burn through more than 1,500 kilowatt hours annually. That is a permanent subscription fee for a service the ground under your house once provided at no cost, at far larger scale, for centuries at a stretch. The refrigerator is a brilliant machine. The mistake was letting it erase the knowledge instead of joining it, because the old knowledge is still measurably better at certain jobs. Open any modern root cellar guide and you will find the medieval specification rediscovered line by line. Hold 32 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Keep humidity between 85 and 95%. Leave an earth or gravel floor. Fit 2 vents at different heights, one low for intake, one high for exhaust. Site the room into a north-facing slope. That is a 15th century undercroft described in the language of a homesteading blog, and a properly built one still carries 500 to 1,000 pounds of vegetables through winter on zero electricity. And if your house already sits over an old stone or brick cellar, the maintenance rules write themselves. Keep the vents open. Leave the floor unsealed. Point any repairs in lime rather than cement, and turn away every contractor who offers to tank the walls in waterproof render. The room was designed to breathe, and it will regulate itself for another century if you let it. The wine industry never even pretended to forget. The most valuable bottles on earth still age in underground stone cellars because a buried vault holds the steady low temperature, high humidity, and darkness that no above-ground room matches without constant mechanical effort. Every champagne house digging its bottles into chalk galleries is running a medieval cellar with better lighting. The other survivors prove the same point. The Norwich undercrofts still sit beneath the modern city, some of them in use by the businesses above. Pub cellars with their original vents intact still hold beer at temperatures their owners never have to think about. And under the town hall in Bremen, the Ratskeller still keeps around 650 varieties of German wine in the same vaulted rooms the city council built in 1405. One of its chambers, the Apostelkeller, was added around 1550 and still holds 12 oak barrels of Rhine wine from the 18th century, resting in the dark exactly where coopers rolled them. That barrel from 1653 is still down there. It has outlasted the Holy Roman Empire, the entire age of steam, 2 world wars, and every refrigerator ever manufactured. The men who built the room around it never saw a thermometer and never heard the words thermal mass, vapor permeability, or convection. They knew the ground beneath their feet held a temperature that never wavered, and they knew how to build a room that let the earth do the work. We abandoned that knowledge while it was still working, and we have been paying the electric bill ever since. If you found this valuable, hit that like button and subscribe. We investigate forgotten knowledge that the modern world left behind, not because the old ways were always better, but because some of them solved problems we have completely forgotten how to solve. Drop a comment and tell us which forgotten room, material, or building technique we should dig into next. Subscribe, and let's keep investigating.